When a millionaire falls for his employee, a love story with a deadly twist. Welcome to Mr. Carter Stories. Hello, my dear listeners. I'm Mr. Carter, and I want to personally welcome you to this beautiful world of love, betrayal, passion, and suspense. Every story I create comes straight from my heart to give you unforgettable emotions, thrilling twists, and deep, meaningful moments. I know many of you watch my videos and enjoy my stories, and I'm so grateful for that. But I've noticed that most of my sweet family watches without subscribing, and because of that, my reach has gone down. If you love my stories, if you want me to continue writing beautiful, emotional, and suspenseful tales just for you, then please hit that subscribe button. Your support means everything to me. With every subscription, every like, and every comment, you help me grow and continue creating the stories you love the most. So let's make this family even stronger. Subscribe now, and let's dive into another breathtaking story together. Much love, Mr. Carter. The skyline of New York shimmered like diamonds against the night sky, towering skyscrapers standing tall in their brilliance. Among them, night grand hotels reigned supreme, a symbol of wealth, power, and legacy. At the very top of its headquarters, in a lavish penthouse office, sat Alexander Knight, a man who had everything, yet felt nothing. At 30 years old, Alexander was the youngest self-made billionaire in the city, a force to be reckoned with in the hospitality industry. Tall, devastatingly handsome, with chiseled features, piercing blue eyes, and a presence that commanded attention, he was the epitome of success. Women desired him, men envied him. Yet beneath the polished exterior, there was emptiness, a loneliness he had long learned to ignore. His life revolved around business meetings, signing multi-million-dollar deals, and managing his empire. Relationships, they were fleeting. Love, a distraction. At least that's what he told himself, until the day she walked into his life. Sophia Evans stepped into Knight Grand Hotels with a quiet elegance that made heads turn. At 25 years old, she carried herself with the poise of someone who knew her worth. Dressed in a perfectly tailored navy blue dress, her soft curls cascading over her shoulders, and her striking green eyes filled with determination, she was breathtakingly beautiful. But it wasn't just her looks that made her stand out. It was her confidence. She had worked hard to build her career, refusing to be reduced to just a pretty face. Her intelligence, ambition, and wit made her a force in the corporate world. When she applied for the position of Alexander Knight's personal assistant, she expected challenges, but nothing could have prepared her for the way he looked at her. The moment she walked into his office for the first time, something shifted in the air. Alexander glanced up from his paperwork, and for a brief moment, he forgot how to breathe. His usual indifference faltered. She was stunning, and yet it wasn't just her beauty that intrigued him. It was the fire in her eyes, the way she met his gaze without fear. "Miss Evans, welcome to the company," he said smoothly, his voice deep and controlled. "Thank you, Mr. Knight. I look forward to working with you," she replied, offering a polite yet confident smile. He liked that. No nervous fidgeting, no starry-eyed admiration, just composure. She was different. Days turned into weeks, and Alexander found himself drawn to everything about her. The way she carried herself, the effortless way she handled his demanding schedule, the way she challenged him with intelligent conversation. She was professional, but she wasn't afraid to push back when necessary. "You have back-to-back meetings tomorrow, but I suggest rescheduling one. You need at least an hour to review the Luxor deal before finalizing it," she told him one afternoon, her eyes scanning his calendar. Alexander leaned back in his chair, intrigued. "You think I won't be prepared?" "I think even billionaires need time to think," she countered, a teasing smile playing on her lips. For the first time in years, Alexander let out a genuine chuckle. No one spoke to him like that, and he liked it. One evening, after an intense board meeting, Alexander sat in his penthouse office, staring out at the city. A quiet knock on the door pulled him from his thoughts. "Still working?" Sophia asked, stepping inside with 2 cups of coffee. "Comes with the job," he replied, motioning for her to sit. She placed the coffee on his desk and leaned against the chair, looking out the window. New York looks different at night, less rushed, more alive. Alexander studied her, intrigued. "You like art, don't you?" She turned to him, surprised. "I do. How did you know?" "The way you look at things, like they tell a story." A soft smile touched her lips. "Art, music, travel. They remind me there's more to life than just work." Alexander exhaled slowly. "I used to think that way too, before business took over." Sophia tilted her head. "Then maybe you should start again." Silence filled the room, charged with undeniable tension. He watched her, the city lights reflecting in her emerald eyes. He had been with many women before, but none had made him feel this pull, this need to know her beyond just an employee. For the first time in years, he felt alive. As the night stretched on, their conversation drifted from business to childhood dreams, favorite places, fears, and hopes. Sophia found herself mesmerized by the man behind the billionaire. Beneath the cold, untouchable exterior was someone passionate, thoughtful, and deeply wounded by the weight of his own success. "Most people see you as a ruthless businessman," she murmured, "but I see more than that." Alexander's jaw tightened. No one had ever looked past his wealth before, and it scared him how much he wanted her to. The air grew heavier, electric. He reached out, his fingers brushing against hers. Just a fleeting touch, but enough to send shivers down her spine. She pulled away, standing up abruptly. "I should go, it's late." "Sophia." She turned to face him, her expression conflicted. "This, whatever this is, it's dangerous." A muscle in his jaw twitched. "And yet you feel it too." She swallowed hard, fighting the pull. "Good night, Mr. Knight." And with that, she walked away, leaving Alexander staring after her, wanting her more than ever. But deep inside, Sophia knew, getting close to Alexander wasn't just dangerous. It could destroy them both. Sophia knew she was playing with fire. Every fiber of her being warned her to stay away, to keep the boundary between her and Alexander untouched. Yet the force pulling them together was undeniable. Days turned into weeks, and with each passing moment, it became harder to ignore the heat between them. At work, their relationship remained professional, at least on the surface. But behind closed doors, in the stolen moments between meetings, in the casual conversations over coffee, in the way his piercing blue eyes lingered on her just a second too long, something, unspoken, crackled between them. Sophia found herself anticipating his presence. She would catch him staring when she thought she wasn't looking, his gaze filled with something dark, something forbidden. And then there were the small touches, the way his hand would brush against hers when he handed her a document, the way his fingers would rest just a little too long against her back when guiding her through a crowded hallway. Each time her skin burned, her heart pounded, and her breath hitched. She told herself it was nothing. A dangerous fantasy. But fantasies had a way of turning into reality. Their late nights at the office became routine. At first, they told themselves it was just work, finalizing reports, preparing for business trips, strategizing corporate deals. But then came the dinners. One evening, after an exhausting negotiation with international investors, Alexander leaned back in his chair and sighed. "You hungry?" he asked, loosening his tie. Sophia smiled. "Starving." Minutes later, they were sitting in the private dining hall of the hotel, a candle-lit table set just for them. "You didn't have to go all out," Sophia said, glancing at the exquisite spread before her. Steak, wine, chocolate soufflé. Alexander smirked. "I never do anything halfway." Their conversation drifted away from work, weaving into personal territories. She learned that he loved classical music despite his sharp, modern personality, that he could play the piano though he rarely did, that his mother had died when he was 12, and that was when he learned the world was cruel. He learned that she loved stargazing, that she once wanted to be an artist, and that she carried a sadness in her heart that she refused to talk about. By the time dessert arrived, they weren't just boss and employee anymore. They were two souls colliding, drawn together by something deeper than attraction, a connection neither of them had felt before. The night grand charity gala was the event of the year, attended by billionaires, celebrities, and the most powerful people in the city. Sophia had been to corporate events before, but this was different. The moment she stepped into the ballroom in a flowing emerald gown, all eyes turned to her, including his. Alexander had never seen anyone so breathtaking. The deep green of her dress made her eyes look like burning gemstones, her golden curls cascading over her shoulders like silk. As she moved through the crowd, greeting executives, he couldn't take his eyes off her. Halfway through the evening, the music changed, and couples started filling the dance floor. "Come dance with me," he murmured, his voice low, his eyes smoldering. She hesitated. "People will talk." "I don't care," he said, taking her hand. He led her onto the dance floor, pulling her close. His hands settled on her waist, his body warm against hers. She placed her hands on his shoulders, feeling the strength beneath the fabric of his tuxedo. As they swayed to the slow rhythm, the world faded away. She could feel his breath against her skin, his heartbeat against hers. She looked up, and their eyes met, a silent war between desire and restraint. "Do you feel this, Sophia?" His voice was husky, laced with something dangerous. Her breath hitched. "Yes." He leaned in, his lips inches from hers. "Then stop fighting it." And then he kissed her. The moment his lips touched hers, the world shattered. Sophia felt like she was falling, her heart pounding as his arms tightened around her. His lips were firm, demanding yet unbearably gentle. A soft moan escaped her as his fingers traced the curve of her spine, sending shivers down her body. She melted into him, surrendering to the fire that had been building between them for weeks. She knew it was wrong, but in that moment she didn't care. The music, the people, the rules, all of it disappeared. She wanted this. She wanted him. But the moment the kiss ended, reality crashed down on her. She took a step back, her chest rising and falling, her lips tingling from his touch. "Sophia," Alexander said, his voice raw, "I don't care about the rules. I don't care about anything else. I want you." Her heart twisted. She wanted him too. God. She wanted him more than she had ever wanted anything. But she couldn't. Because if he knew the truth, if he knew the secret she carried, he wouldn't be looking at her with such burning intensity. He would hate her. She forced herself to step away. "We can't." His jaw clenched. "Why not?" "Because..." She swallowed hard. "Because this will only end in heartbreak." Alexander studied her, his expression unreadable. "Then break me, Sophia," he murmured, "because I'm already yours." Her breath caught. She had spent her whole life running, but for the first time, she wanted to stay, and that terrified her more than anything. Sophia never imagined she would fall this hard. She had told herself that her relationship with Alexander was just a dangerous game, a fleeting fantasy that would soon fade. But with each stolen moment, each whispered confession, the lines blurred until she couldn't tell where the lie ended and the truth began. They were sneaking around, keeping their love hidden like a forbidden secret. And God, it was thrilling. In the office, they were nothing more than boss and employee, professional, distant, unreadable. But behind closed doors, they were fire and passion, hands tangled in hair, lips crashing together in desperate hunger. They found ways to be alone, ways to steal time. A lingering touch when no one was watching. A brush of his lips against her ear as he passed by. A love note slipped into her notebook, written in his bold, confident handwriting. "I need you tonight. My penthouse. Midnight." The anticipation alone sent shivers down her spine. There was something intoxicating about keeping their affair a secret. The way he would slip his hand under the table at meetings, his fingers tracing slow circles on her thigh, leaving her breathless. The way he would pull her into darkened corners when no one was looking, capturing her mouth in a kiss so deep she forgot how to breathe. One evening, as they stepped into the elevator, Alexander's eyes darkened with one desire. "Someone might see," Sophia whispered, her pulse racing as the doors slid shut. "I don't care," he murmured, pressing her against the mirrored wall, his hands roaming over her body. She gasped as his lips found her neck, feverish, urgent. But just as his hand reached the zipper of her dress, the elevator dinged, the doors opening. They pulled apart just in time, fixing their expressions, acting as if nothing had happened. But the heat in Alexander's gaze told her everything. This wasn't just desire anymore. One afternoon, as Sophia walked into Alexander's office, she found 2 plane tickets resting on his desk. "Pack your bags," Alexander said, his voice laced with excitement. "We're going to Paris." Her heart stopped. "Paris?" He smirked. "I have a business meeting. But mostly, I just want you to myself for the weekend." A romantic getaway, just the 2 of them. She should have said no. She should have reminded him that they were. Alexander had booked the most luxurious suite overlooking the Eiffel Tower. The moment they arrived, he took her hand and led her through the cobblestone streets, showing her the beauty of the city. They wandered through hidden alleyways, exploring art galleries, tasting wine in candlelit bistros, stealing kisses on bridges as boats sailed beneath them. Under the golden glow of the city, they forgot the world. Sophia had never felt so alive. That night, as they stood on the balcony of their suite, the Paris skyline stretched before them, glittering and infinite. Sophia turned to Alexander, her heart pounding. "This feels like a dream." He cupped her face, his eyes burning with something deeper than desire. "Then let's never wake up." And then, he kissed her. It was slow at first, tender, reverent, but soon it became desperate, consuming, as if he was trying to memorize her, as if he knew their time was slipping away. She gasped as he lifted her, carrying her inside, laying her down on the silk sheets. His hands explored her skin with aching slowness, as if worshipping every inch of her. They made love with a passion that was both urgent and infinite, a love that burned so fiercely it unscared her. Because in that moment, she realized something terrifying. She wasn't just falling for Alexander. She was already his. Completely. Irrevocably. As she lay tangled in his arms, listening to his heartbeat, she wished time would stop. But it wouldn't, because no matter how much she loved him, her secrets would destroy them. And soon, Alexander would learn the truth, a truth that would shatter everything. Sophia should have been happy, She had just spent a weekend in Paris with the most powerful, desirable man she had ever met, waking up in his arms, feeling cherished, wanted, adored. She had let herself believe, for just a little while, that she could have this, that she could be his. But reality had a cruel way of catching up. And now, back in New York, as she sat in her apartment, staring at her phone, her hands trembled. The screen flashed with a new message. Unknown number. You can't hide forever. Sophia's heart pounded. Number no, no, no. She gripped the phone so tightly her knuckles turned white. A cold sweat prickled her skin. She deleted the message. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it wasn't for her. And then another message came. Unknown number. He doesn't know the truth, does he? Her blood ran cold. Someone knew. Someone knew who she really was. And if they told Alexander, everything would fall apart. The next morning, Sophia arrived at work with a pounding headache and a heart full of fear. She needed to be normal. She needed to pretend everything was fine. But as soon as she stepped into Alexander's office, she knew he could sense something was wrong. He looked up from his desk, his piercing blue eyes scanning her with sharp intensity. You're late. Traffic, she lied, forcing a smile. Alexander leaned back in his chair, studying her. You didn't answer my calls last night. Sophia swallowed hard. I was just exhausted. He didn't buy it. Something's wrong. She laughed nervously. Nothing's wrong. Alexander stood, walking toward her with slow, deliberate steps. Sophia. He reached for her, his fingers brushing against her cheek. You can tell me anything. You know that, right? Her chest tightened. She wanted to tell him. She wanted to confess everything. The past she had buried, the nightmare that haunted her, the reason why their love was doomed before it even began. But if she did, she would lose him. So instead, she pulled away. I'm not sure if I want a serious relationship, Alexander, she whispered. The room went silent. Alexander froze, his expression darkening. What? I don't know if this is what I want, she lied, hating herself for every word. His jaw clenched. You didn't feel that way in Paris. Paris was a dream, she whispered, her voice shaking. But this is real, and I don't know if I can do this. Alexander's hands curled into fists at his sides. So that's it? You're just walking away? Sophia forced herself to hold his gaze. Maybe we should keep things professional. For a long moment, he said nothing. His blue eyes, once filled with warmth and desire, turned cold. Fine, he said, his voice clipped, if that's what you want. And then, you think pushing him away will save him? It won't. Her breath caught in her throat. Her past wasn't just following her. It was coming for her. Alexander Knight was not a man easily shaken. In business, he dominated boardrooms with ruthless precision, breaking down competition like a well-calculated game of chess. In life, he had always been in control of his emotions, his decisions, and the people around him. But Sophia Evans, she was an enigma, and something was wrong. He could see it in the way she moved, how she avoided his gaze, how her smiles didn't reach her eyes anymore. She wasn't the same fierce, confident woman who had challenged him, captivated him, and made him fall harder than he ever thought possible. Something had changed, and it drove him insane. Not knowing what it was, it started subtly. Sophia began pulling away. At the office, she no longer lingered in his penthouse after hours. She no longer let her fingers brush against his as she handed him his morning coffee. She spoke less, laughed less, and when he kissed her, she hesitated. She was hiding something. Alexander knew people. He knew when they were lying. And Sophia, she was a terrible liar. He wasn't the kind of man who ignored his instincts. If she wouldn't tell him the truth, he would find it himself. Late at night, he sat in his study, a glass of whiskey in one hand, his laptop open in front of him. He had hired the best private investigator in New York to look into Sophia's past. But when the report came in, there was almost nothing. No family records, no childhood address, no history before 5 years ago. It was as if Sophia Evans hadn't existed before then. Alexander's grip tightened around his glass. "Who the hell are you, Sophia?" he muttered. That evening, as Sophia stood in his bathroom, the sound of rushing water filling the space, Alexander sat on the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. He needed to confront her. He needed the truth. His thoughts were interrupted by the sudden buzz of her phone on the nightstand. A message. The screen lit up, and what he saw made his blood run cold. Unknown number. "You're playing a dangerous game, Sophia." Rage coiled in his chest, his pulse pounding violently. What the hell? Alexander grabbed the phone, staring at the message. His mind spun. Who was threatening her? And why the fuck was she keeping it from him? The sound of the shower stopped. Sophia stepped out of the bathroom, wrapped in a silk robe, her damp hair falling in soft waves over her shoulders. But the moment she saw the phone in Alexander's hand, her body went rigid. Her face drained of color. "Where did you get that?" she whispered. Alexander stood, his expression dark, unreadable. "It was right here on the nightstand." His voice was calm, too calm. "Who sent this message, Sophia?" She didn't answer. He took a step closer. "Who's threatening you?" Sophia swallowed hard. "It's nothing." That was the wrong answer. Alexander clenched his jaw. "Try again." She crossed her arms over her chest. "It's personal." His temper flared. "Personal?" He let out a sharp, humorless laugh. "I don't think so, sweetheart. When someone is threatening you, when you start pulling away from me, that's no longer just personal." Her lips parted, but no words came out. "I hired a private investigator," he admitted, his voice low and deadly. "There's almost nothing about you before 5 years ago. No past, no history, no family records." Sophia's breath hitched. His eyes narrowed. Alexander stood across from her, arms crossed, his piercing blue eyes filled with concern and frustration. "You're going to tell me what's going on, Sophia," he said, his voice sharp but laced with something softer. "Worry." She swallowed hard. He had always looked at her with desire, with affection, with possession. But once he knew the truth, once he knew who she really was, would he still look at her the same way? Or would he see a stranger? Taking a deep breath, she whispered, "My name isn't Sophia Evans." Alexander's expression didn't change, but his body tensed. She forced herself to continue. "It was never Sophia. My real name is Emily Carter." A long, tense silence filled the room. Alexander's jaw tightened, his icy blue gaze darkening. "What are you saying?" She exhaled shakily. "I've been lying to you. To everyone. I had to. Because if Robert Sinclair finds me..." Her voice broke. "He will kill me." Alexander stilled, his entire body radiating tension. "Sinclair? As in Robert Sinclair?" Sophia nodded, terror clawing at her throat. "He ruined my life," she whispered. "He destroyed my family." She hesitated, her fingers trembling as she reached for the past she had tried so hard to forget. "My father, James Carter, was a businessman, a good man, but he made the mistake of trusting the wrong person." She took a deep breath. "Robert Sinclair." Alexander's expression darkened. Sophia's voice was barely above a whisper. "Sinclair framed my father for a crime he didn't commit. Embezzlement, fraud, money laundering. He used fake evidence, twisted the truth, and had my father arrested." Her throat tightened. "The stress, the shame, it killed him." He died in prison before his trial even began. Alexander's fists clenched, his breathing uneven. But Sophia wasn't finished. I knew the truth. I knew Sinclair was the real criminal. But no one would listen to a 20-year-old girl crying about injustice. Her hands curled into fists. So I stole something, a USB drive, proof of his crimes, documents, offshore accounts, recordings of his deals. Her breath hitched. And then I ran. Alexander inhaled sharply. You have evidence against him? I had it, she admitted bitterly. But before I could go to the police, he found out. He sent men after me. I barely escaped. Alexander's entire body went rigid. She forced herself to meet his gaze. I changed my name. I changed everything about my life. I became Sophia Evans, and for the past 5 years I've been hiding, hoping he wouldn't find me. She laughed bitterly, but I was stupid to think I could ever escape him. Her voice cracked. They found me, Alexander. She showed him the messages on her phone. Someone knows who I am, and it's only a matter of time before he comes for me. For a long moment, Alexander said nothing. His face was unreadable, his expression carefully controlled. Then, suddenly, he turned away. Sophia felt something deep inside her shatter. Of course, he was done with her. How could he not be? She had lied to him, deceived him, dragged him into her nightmare. Tears burned her eyes, but she forced herself to stay strong. I understand if you want nothing to do with me, she whispered. I'll leave. I won't involve you in this. Alexander's head snapped toward her. His expression was furious. You think I'm going to let you walk away after this? His voice was dangerously low. Sophia's breath caught. I don't want you to get hurt because of me. A muscle ticked in his jaw. Then, before she could react, he was in front of her, his hands gripping her arms, his eyes blazing with determination. Listen to me, Sophia. Emily. I don't care what your name is. I don't care about your past. But I'll tell you one thing. His voice was deep, steady, unbreakable. No one will touch you, not while I'm here. Her breath hitched, his grip on her tightened. You're mine. Do you understand? And I don't abandon what's mine. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Alexander, I'll protect you, he whispered, no matter what it takes. And then, he kissed her. It wasn't like their previous kisses, hungry, passionate, desperate. This kiss was a vow, a silent promise that he would never let her go. Sophia had never felt safer than in Alexander's arms. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she wouldn't have to run anymore. But just as that fragile hope settled in her chest, her phone buzzed again. Another message. Unknown number. Too late, Emily, I'm already here. Her heart stopped. A shadow moved outside. Alexander sat in his study, a half-empty glass of whiskey on the table, his mind clouded with thoughts of her. Sophia, Emily, whatever name she went by, had become an obsession he couldn't shake. Despite her secrets, despite her lies, she had buried herself so deep inside his soul that no force on earth could remove her. And now he was beginning to fear that he was losing her. Her distant behavior, the way she flinched at shadows, the way she had begged him, to drop the subject of her past. His jaw tightened. Something was very wrong, and he was going to figure out what. But before he could, his world came crashing down. Sophia never came home that night. Alexander called. No answer. He sent messages. No reply. A gnawing sense of dread twisted in his chest. He had just left her apartment hours ago, pressing a rough, lingering kiss to her lips before whispering, "You're safe with me." But she wasn't. And when his phone finally rang, he already knew. He was too late. The video appeared on his phone. He opened it, and his breath stopped. Sophia was tied to a chair, her wrists bound, a strip of tape across her mouth. Her eyes were wide, filled with raw terror. A gun was pressed to her temple, and behind her stood Robert Sinclair. Alexander felt a deep, violent rage bloom in his chest as the man smirked at the camera. "Mr. Knight," Sinclair drawled, "I see you've taken an interest in something that belongs to me." Alexander's fingers tightened into fists. "If you want her alive, give me what she stole." A slow, taunting chuckle. "You have 24 hours. Then the screen went black. The glass in Alexander's hand shattered. A deadly silence filled the room as blood dripped from his clenched fist. He had spent years building an empire, controlling the world around him. No one had ever dared to take something from him. And no one was going to take Sophia, not while he was still breathing. A storm of rage and pure, unrelenting fury surged through him. He grabbed his phone and made one call. "Get my team. We're going hunting." Alexander wasn't a man who begged. He wasn't a man who negotiated. He was a man who took what was his. And that night, he would take Sophia back, even if it meant burning the world down to do it. Alexander sat in the back seat of his armored SUV, his jaw clenched so tightly it felt like stone. His knuckles were white against the leather of the steering wheel, his blood running hot with rage. The video of Sophia, bound, terrified, helpless, played over and over in his mind, fueling the fire inside him. She was his, and no one took what was his. His right-hand man, Cole Matthews, sat beside him, checking his rifle. "We got confirmation. It's an abandoned warehouse on the outskirts of the city, guarded but not a fortress." Alexander's eyes darkened. "I don't care how many men he has. We end this, tonight." Cole smirked. "That's what I like to hear, boss." The convoy of black SUVs sped toward the destination, a storm brewing in the night. The building loomed ahead, rusted, broken windows, shadows lurking in the corners. Alexander stepped out of the SUV, his presence like a loaded gun, silent, cold, dangerous. Cole signaled to the men. 10 elite operatives, armed, trained, deadly. They moved like ghosts through the night, surrounding the building. Inside, Sophia sat tied to a chair, her heartbeat pounding like a war drum. Robert Sinclair paced in front of her, his smirk never leaving his face. "You thought you could run forever?" He chuckled, tapping the gun against her temple. "But no one escapes me, sweetheart." Sophia's pulse spiked. Then, boom. The warehouse doors exploded open, gunfire erupted, and the devil himself walked in. Alexander Knight. Bullets flew, men fell. Alexander moved like a predator, each shot a death sentence. His team covered him, eliminating Sinclair's men with brutal efficiency. Sophia's heart leapt as she saw him, his sharp suit now streaked with dust, his face unreadable but fierce. "Alexander!" she screamed. Her voice was like a trigger. He turned, eyes locking onto her, but before he could reach her, a gun pressed against her ribs. Robert Sinclair grabbed her, yanking her against him. "Move, and she dies," he snarled. Everything froze. Alexander's finger tightened on the trigger, his icy blue eyes narrowing. Sinclair smirked. "You love her, don't you?" He dragged the cold steel along Sophia's cheek. "I wonder how it feels, knowing I'll be the last thing she ever sees." Sophia squeezed her eyes shut. This was it. Then, bang. The shot echoed through the warehouse. Sinclair Sophia gasped as he collapsed, lifeless. Smoke curled from Alexander's gun. His expression was unreadable, his stance unshaken. Then, in an instant, Sophia was free. She ran to him, her body trembling. The moment she crashed into his chest, his arms wrapped around her, fierce and unyielding. "I thought I lost you," she choked out. His grip on her tightened. Never. For a moment, There was only the sound of their heartbeats, fast and desperate. She pulled back, searching his eyes. It's over, right? But deep inside, Alexander knew. It wasn't, because even though Robert Sinclair was dead, the nightmare was far from over. The SUV moved through the quiet streets of New York, but inside, a storm raged. Alexander sat in the back seat, his arms wrapped protectively around Sophia. Her body was still trembling, her breaths uneven. She clung to him as if afraid that if she let go, she'd be ripped away again. He pressed a kiss to the top of her head, his jaw tight. It's over, he whispered. Sophia wanted to believe him, but even with Sinclair dead, she felt the ghost of fear breathing down her neck. She had been running for so long, hiding, surviving. But tonight something had changed. Tonight she had someone fighting for her. And maybe, just maybe, she didn't have to run anymore. The moment they stepped into Alexander's penthouse, Sophia's knees buckled. Alexander caught her, sweeping her into his arms with ease. I've got you, he murmured, carrying her through the vast living room, past the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the city, and into his bedroom. He gently set her down on the bed and knelt in front of her, his piercing blue eyes searching her face. You're safe now. His voice was firm, certain. Sophia blinked back, tears. Safe. She had never known what that felt like until now. Her lip trembled. I thought I'd never see you again. Alexander's jaw tensed. I would have burned the world down to find you. And she believed him. Tears slipped free, and she let them. For once she didn't have to be strong. Alexander cupped her face, brushing away a tear with his thumb. His touch was gentle, so different from the violence they had just escaped. She leaned into his palm, letting his warmth seep into her skin. Then, in a broken whisper, she confessed, I love you. Alexander froze. His expression softened and something flickered in his eyes, something deep, something raw. He traced his fingers along her jaw, his voice steady, unshakable. And I will never let you go. Sophia let out a shaky breath. For the first time in years, she wasn't running. She wasn't hiding. She was home. Alexander held her that night, his arms a protective fortress around her. She buried her face in his chest, listening to the rhythmic beat of his heart. It was the only sound that mattered. He didn't rush her. He didn't push for more. He just held her. And for the first time, love didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like freedom. The ballroom of the Night Grand Hotel was bathed in golden light, glittering chandeliers casting an ethereal glow over the crowd. The city's elite had gathered for the annual charity gala, expecting an evening of fine wine, orchestral music, and whispered business deals. But tonight, Alexander Knight had other plans. He stood at the center of the room, microphone in hand, his piercing blue eyes scanning the sea of faces. His heart pounded, not from nerves but from certainty. Sophia stood beside him, breathtaking in an emerald silk gown. Her hand trembled in his, but he squeezed it gently. A silent promise. Clearing his throat, he spoke. For years my life has been about power, success, and business. I never imagined I'd find something, or someone, who would mean more. He turned to her, his gaze softening. Sophia Evans has changed that. A murmur swept through the crowd. Gasps, whispers, shock. Sophia's breath caught. Alexander wasn't just acknowledging their love. He was claiming her in front of the world. I love this woman, he continued, voice strong, a single white envelope resting on the marble table by the entrance. His blood ran cold. No one should have been able to get past security. Heart pounding, he tore it open. One line. You killed my brother. This isn't over. A chill spread through his veins. Robert Sinclair was dead, but someone else was watching, waiting, and they wanted revenge. Alexander clenched his jaw. No one was taking Sophia from him, Not now, not ever. But deep inside, he knew. The war was just beginning. The private jet was scheduled to leave at sunrise. Sophia stood by the massive floor-to-ceiling window of Alexander's penthouse, staring at the glittering city lights one last time. Tomorrow, they would be gone. A fresh start. A new life. Far away from New York. Far away from danger. She turned toward Alexander, who sat on the edge of the bed, rolling up the sleeves of his crisp white shirt. His piercing blue eyes locked onto hers, dark with determination. "Everything is set," he said. "New passports, new identities. By this time tomorrow, we'll be in Italy." Sophia took a deep breath, trying to shake the unease curling in her stomach. "Do you really think we can escape it all?" Alexander stood walking toward her. When he cupped her face, his touch was warm, grounding. "With me," he whispered, "you're always safe." She closed her eyes, leaning into him. For the first time in forever, she felt like she could breathe. But outside the penthouse, in the shadows of the night, someone was watching. And they weren't going to let them leave. The gunshot shattered the silence. Glass exploded as a bullet ripped through the window. Sophia screamed, as Alexander yanked her down just in time, shielding her with his body. Another shot. Then another. He pulled her behind the leather couch, his hand gripping the back of her neck as he whispered, "Stay low, stay quiet." Her heart pounded wildly. They were under attack. The penthouse door burst open, and masked figures stormed inside, their guns gleaming under the chandelier light. Sophia's breath hitched. This wasn't a robbery. They had come for them. Alexander moved fast, grabbing his gun from the hidden compartment in the table. He fired away without hesitation, dropping one of the intruders instantly. But there were more. Too many. They were outnumbered. And then... bang! A sharp, searing pain. Alexander staggered, his body jerking, as a bullet tore through his side. Sophia's world stopped. "No, no!" she screamed, catching him as he collapsed against her. Blood soaked through his white shirt, staining her hands. She pressed her palm against the wound, desperately trying to stop the bleeding. "Stay with me. Please, Alexander, stay with me." His grip on her tightened, his face pale but his eyes burning with one last command. "Run, Sophia." Her heart shattered. Tears blurred her vision. "No, not without you." More footsteps. More gunfire. They were closing in. She refused to leave him. She wouldn't let him die alone. Because without him, there was no escape. There was no life. And if this was the end, then they'd face it together. The ambulance tore through the city streets, sirens wailing against the night. Sophia sat beside Alexander, her hands covered in his blood, her heart hammering in her chest. His head rested against her lap, his normally sharp blue eyes now half-closed, unfocused. "Stay with me," she whispered, stroking his face. "Please, don't leave me." He tried to speak, but the pain stole his voice. Instead, his fingers weakly gripped hers. Even now, bleeding, broken, he was still fighting. But she knew. He was slipping away. Tears streamed down her cheeks as she pressed a desperate kiss to his forehead. "I love you," she whispered. "You can't leave me. Not now." His breath hitched, then in a barely there whisper, "I'm not going anywhere." But his eyes closed, and Sophia's world shattered. The hospital was cold, too bright, too sterile. Sophia sat in the waiting room, her hands clutching the blood-stained fabric of her dress. Every second felt like an eternity. Doctors rushed past, murmuring words she couldn't understand. Cole arrived, his face grim. The bullet hit his lung. They're operating now. Sophia's breath shook. She had seen Alexander Knight face danger, power, enemies who wanted him dead. But nothing had ever scared her more than this moment. The thought of losing him was unbearable. So she did the only thing she could. She prayed. She prayed to a God she had long stopped believing in. She prayed for one more chance. For him. For them. And then she waited. 3 days passed. 3 days of hell. Sophia never left his side. She held his hand, whispered to him, willed him to come back to her. And then his fingers moved. Her breath caught. "Alexander?" she whispered, leaning in, desperate, hopeful. A slow, painful inhale, then in a rough, broken voice, "You're mine, forever." Tears streamed down her face as she pressed her forehead to his, sobbing in relief. "I thought I lost you." His fingers brushed her cheek, weak but certain. "You never will." Weeks later, Alexander stepped out of the hospital, his arm still bandaged, but his grip on Sophia's hand was strong. They had made their decision. No more running, no more secrets, no more fear. They were leaving everything behind. A fresh start, a new life. Hand in hand, they walked toward their future. Sophia turned to him, eyes filled with love, hope, and something she never thought she'd feel again: peace. "Love saved us," she whispered. Alexander smiled, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "No," he murmured. "You saved me." And as they disappeared into the sunrise, Sophia knew their love wasn't just survival, it was forever.